Welcome to Aston Means Business. My name's Steve Dyson, a journalist who's interviewing top business academics and business leaders who are developing staff here at Aston University. This podcast has been going since October 2019, and there are now 60 previous episodes that you can find and listen to by simply Googling Aston Means Business. This is the 7th series of Aston Means Business, and it focuses on how the university is helping to prepare businesses and executives for Industry 4.0, with Aston University's 2030 strategy front of mind. In today's episode, we're going to discuss the challenges of bringing equality, diversity, and inclusion to the workplace. To explore this subject, I'm going to interview Shivani Sharma, the new Deputy Dean of People, Culture and Inclusion at the College for Business and Social Sciences here at Aston University. And also joining us is Omar Rashid, a director of the HR Department, a human resources franchise for Birmingham Central and Wolverhampton. Omar specialises in diversity and recruitment. Hello, Shivani and Omar.
Hello.
Shivani, let's start with you. You've just begun your journey here at Aston University in a new role, which covers people, culture and inclusion. Before I ask you specifically about that, tell me how you arrived at this point. What have you done up to now, and what got you so involved in the subject of inclusion?
Wow, that is a big question to start with. But I think the easiest thing to do is to go back to the beginning. I had originally planned looking at members of my wider family to pursue medicine. However, as a 17-year-old doing chemistry homework with a teacher that I didn't get on with very well, my brother-in-law, who's a GP and hates all podcasts that I'm in now because I tell this story, helped me with my chemistry homework, and I got 0 out of 10 and thought, wow, if he can't do it, I won't be able to do it. So I switched into psychology, which propelled me into an undergraduate degree in that area, much to my dad's horror. At the end of my undergraduate degree, because of the grade that I was awarded, the university offered me a PhD studentship, at which point I was a bit like, what is a PhD? Why would I want to do one? And the professor who was trying to encourage me towards that path said, have you not thought about how the academics who have been lecturing you got their doctorate, why they're called professor? And my response was I just wanted to get my head down, study, and to be able to leave university and enter a good job where I can pay my mortgage essentially and aim towards a better life. But essentially I trusted that professor and went with their advice and started to pursue a PhD. Towards the end of that, I did think that I might like to go into clinical psychology, and took myself off to the NHS to get some work experience. I remember sitting in the waiting room of a nephrologist I had a meeting with about a research project, and a patient sitting there waited for everybody to go and then said to me in Punjabi, "Tu Punjabi bol diya," which means, "Do you speak Punjabi?" And then I had this great conversation with that patient. I then went in and innocently asked the professor I was meeting, I'm aware you do lots of kidney research, and what do you do about patients who aren't able to access in English? To which he responded, "At the moment, we just exclude them. However, perhaps you would like to help me solve this issue." And that really meant that from there on, my career took a different turn. I accepted an academic post after my PhD at the university where I had studied, quickly progressed into management, and pursued research in health equity, health inclusion alongside. And that naturally then spilled into my interest in equality, diversity, inclusion in the academic part of my work as well. So that's how I've ended up being both a researcher in health equity and a leader in academia, with a focus on people, culture and inclusion.
And just to underline that exclusion at that stage was because they simply didn't have the access to language. They didn't include them because there was not enough people speaking that language to carry out the survey.
Well, more because the research methods hadn't been tailored to include a wider community of patients. Yeah, absolutely.
So in terms of your role now, Shivani, you're Deputy Dean for People, Culture and Inclusion here at Aston. What's included in that remit, and what are your aims for that role?
So as the title suggests, the role is all about people, whether that's our staff, our students, or the stakeholders that engage with the university. It is a new role and a senior position within the college, which is really exciting. So it's an opportunity to craft something as well as to deliver on what the original vision was for the position. But essentially, I think in all organisations, travelling towards your mission, your goals, your objectives is only as good as the culture that you can create around that. So this work will all be about making sure that our staff and our students have the right environment to thrive. So for the academic workforce, that means from the minute you think about the university to every juncture of your career stage with us. And for students, making sure that regardless of what background you enter the university from, you experience fairly equitably the transformative potential of this university.
So give me a practical example of how that might work.
So on an everyday basis for staff, it will be around the support, the development, the planning for what skills we need in our workforce, as well as making sure that people have access to the right opportunities to help them work towards. So often people entering academia want to work towards titles like associate professor in recognition of their research, or professorships over time. So what is it about your experience of the workplace that's going to help drive that kind of achievement, that engagement? And for students, making sure, as I said, that all of the curriculum that you're exposed to gives you a broad view of the world, not just education knowledge that has been generated by particular communities, particular societies. So that's often referred to as areas like decolonising the curriculum. So I'll be working with the Deputy Dean Education to look at how we make sure that also the content of the education that students experience at the university has a broad worldview on it, because we know that that enables people to bring their everyday experience into the learning environment and contributes towards their success. So anything ultimately that relates to people will be something to do with interfacing with this role. So it's quite broad, but I think that's because people go through every aspect of organisations.
One other question I want to ask you about it, Shivani. I know Aston University well. It's many high-rise blocks. There's multiple floors. There's loads of entry doors. There's different slopes and approaches. Talk to me about inclusion with that in mind, because obviously there's different meetings, different lectures, different events taking place. How does that involve you in terms of thinking about how inclusion works?
So I think one of the good things about Aston as a university is its place. So so far, I've only been at the university for 6 weeks, but I have experienced it already as a very welcoming, very inclusive culture. So really for me, one of the key challenges within this role is going to be, in the current social climate, the words equality, diversity, inclusion feel quite saturated. So how are we going to make sure that at all these levels that you're talking about, the culture here is truly distinctive and experienced in a different way? So for me, and working with the college leadership team where I'm based, we're really going to be championing a kind culture. So what does that look and feel like for our students and our staff? And how does that then influence their experience of studying and working here? So that will be one of the key vehicles that I'm using to make our culture at the university very, very distinctive. And another practical example I'd like to give is the concept of diversity intelligence. So part of the issue with having roles that look after people, or EDI, is that people can often think that the responsibility sits in this box over here and that person is addressing people-related issues. But actually what I want to work towards with the leadership team is a diversity intelligent culture amongst our staff and students, which means that you wouldn't need someone like me saying, actually, if you schedule an interview at 9 a.m. in the morning, a working parent might struggle to get to that if they have a childcare drop-off to do or a like. Everybody already applies that lens. If we're going to have an event in a building, we need to make sure that there's appropriate disability access. So I think if we can support our staff and students in bringing that mindset already, that will support inclusion, not only while they're here, but in whichever ways they're contributing in society as well.
No, those are good practical examples. Let's turn now to Omar Rashid. He's the director at the HR department, and he's a specialist in diversity and recruitment. First of all, Omar, what were you doing before you started your franchise with the HR department, and what's led you to focus on diversity?
first, it's not going to be as exciting or as, inspirational as Dr. Shivani here. I don't have a PhD for starters, but I actually, from a traditional Asian background, I was good at maths, so my dad sent me to university. Am I allowed to say a different university to Aston University that I went to?
Of course.
Went to Coventry University to be an accountant. So my dad encouraged me to be an accountant. And the lecturer there, I think he probably felt tired and bored of teaching accountancy, because the way he taught it was just like so dry. And I remember sitting there with my friend thinking, if this is what accountants are like, this is not for me. And that's no disrespect to any accountants who will be listening. And then I kind of changed my course. So from business and accounts, I moved to general business studies and business management. It was only in my last year I took a HR module, and it was the opposite. So the lecturer there, she was inspiring. She kind of saw and taught HR in a way about people and development and everything. That really made me kind of like think, okay, this could be interesting. And then I got my degree, and then again. From a typical Asian family, my cousins had got their masters and some of them had got their PhDs, and my dad was like, a degree for you is not enough. You need to go and get a master's as well. And I was like, okay, fine. I went back to Coventry University and I studied HR, just did HR management, because that was the last thing I really remembered that I really liked. I didn't want to be an accountant. I didn't want to go into like supply chain or marketing or any of that aspect of business. It was just HR. I did my master's in HR, graduated in 2006. And then from 2007, I was fortunate to get jobs. Started as a HR admin in Coventry City Council, worked into the NHS for 7-8 years, got to management level, got redundant, and then I started contracting for a while. And then I got headhunted to go and work for a charity, which I did for about 6-7 months. And it just wasn't the right role for me. And I always say, I was 33 at the time, and I felt like if I was 63 winding down, that was the perfect sort of role. But for me, someone at that age, I was just like full of energy, really wanted to kind of progress. And unfortunately for me, that just role wasn't for me, sort of thing. And I did some research. I wanted to go back to contracting. I did some research. It was in our CIPD People magazine that I saw an advert at the back for the HR department franchise. I contacted them, went to their discovery day, and I was kind of sold to the idea of, okay, having your own business with a consultancy, but having that sort of support. And the way I would describe it is, I feel like there's aspects of my role or my business that I feel like I'm an employee as the HR department, because you get some great support, mentorship, etc. But I do have the flexibility of doing things my own, and I've never looked back since. And I did that from 2018, and then sort of getting involved with the Birmingham Chambers, the Asian Chambers, sort of thing, and kind of being more around, I suppose, people like me, Asian sort of thing, and then kind of hearing the stories and sort of the challenges that we face, kind of then got me more interested around recruitment, kind of got me more interested around diversity, kind of went out there to kind of then start educating people that, look, these are the challenges, sort of thing. And then people started asking me as well, we have clients who are non-Asian, non-Muslim, would ask me sort of questions, and I kind of felt happy and proud to kind of share that knowledge and that they would ask me, sort of thing, and kind of really make a difference as well.
You mentioned your role at the Chamber. Give me the detail of that role, but also how you've got involved at Aston University, because I know you haven't studied here, but you have been involved with the students and with the lecturers. So just tell me about those.
Yeah, so when I started the franchise, to get work, the premise was you got to go out and network. Work's not going to come to you. You're going to have to go out and network. So when I started out networking, I got involved with the Birmingham Chamber. There was a division within the Birmingham Chamber, which was the Asian Chamber. And I suppose not stereotypically, maybe just subconsciously, you just kind of felt kind of aligned to, okay, let's go to maybe a chamber or a hub of people that are going to be like yourself, that you can kind of feel comfortable with.
Yeah.
It's just how subconsciously people generally tend to be. Went into the Asian Chamber, networked, got more involved as I got more involved, and as time went on. And then in the second year of my membership, I applied to be on the board, on the executive board. Was on the executive board for a couple of years, and then since sort of like the last 18 months, became the president. So initially it was joint president. And then
you kept that one quiet.
I know, yeah, humble about it, humble president, as I always say. And then from last year, I've become the sole president of the Asian Chamber, which for me is a great moment. It's proud. It's to and for me, the premise is it's a platform for Asian businesses and Asian professionals, but we also open to non-Asians as well, and we do get a lot of non-Asian businesses and professionals also coming into, obviously, tap into the Asian market sort of thing. And it's just through that relationship where Aston University are patrons of the Asian Chamber, got to know a few staff through there as well, Mark Smith being one of them at that time. And then I don't do it anymore, but I also used to run a networking event called the Breakfast Club with a colleague of mine called Gerdas. And through there, a lot of colleagues through Aston University would come and attend. I think they also sponsored one of the events as well. So that's how the relationship kind of grew for the Chamber, from my own event, through social media. A lot of then Aston University staff would kind of connect as well, and it kind of evolved from there, and hopefully will continue as well.
It's always interesting knowing how things interlink in that way. Now, Omar, why should businesses take equality, diversity, and inclusion processes, commonly known as EDIs?
Yeah.
Let's not fear about calling it EDI in this podcast now. We've explained what it means. But why should people take EDI seriously? I mean, while many people value EDI highly, others worry that it can become tokenistic. Who's right? Who's right, Omar?
I think it's each party has a claim, and I think it's all about how it's implemented. And I don't like to say implemented, because for me, the benefits of it is, if it's done properly, it should be something that's the norm. We live in a society, we live in a world, we live in a culture where, you look around and it's diverse. The three of us here, we are diverse in our own way, through background, race and gender. So,
and weight in my case.
So the opportunities there, and the reasons why you should do it, there's enough research. There's a lot of research out there that goes and looks at that. If implemented properly or if embedded properly, there's so many benefits. Shivani just mentioned language is one. Do you know what I mean? There's opportunities there through different skills. Each individual, whether it's race, religion, etc., will bring their own perspective, their own uniques, their own skills. Even people with a disability as well, they can see things in a certain way. Their mind works in a certain way that actually that's a skill. In a certain way, it shouldn't be seen as a barrier or a disadvantage. Actually, that's a different skill and a mindset that they also have. And I think implemented properly, and like it's a culture, like Shivani said, something that's not a tick box. It's powerful. The research is there, the impact is there, and it opens up to so many more opportunities. As a business owner, we look at different ways to create opportunities. I always say diversity is an opportunity, because through that, so many other avenues open up as well.
What makes sense to me is when you just said the word tick box, because sometimes when myself or one of my own three sons have gone for jobs or gone to different events, they've complained about this tick box mentality.
Yeah.
They were asked a certain question to prove an organisation's EDI worthiness. And that tick box mentality, I think, myself, is what can sometimes annoy people. They think that, an organisation is just playing by the book, just getting the tick in the box, and they're not really doing proper diversity. Is that what you're on about?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, a couple of examples. You see sometimes Black History Month is something that's quite common, where businesses will do it, and you then see, well, okay, that's the only time you've kind of piped up, sort of thing. What? Okay, you've acknowledged Black History Month, great, but then what about the other 11, 12 months of the year? As we speak today, fasting, for example. Now, some businesses may, just for the month of Ramadan, might provide a prayer room or make some allowances for someone to go out and pray. For me, it shouldn't be just for that month. It should have been something that's all year round, something that you acknowledge all year round, sort of thing. And I think when you look at all the literature and you look at all the noise about, is it worth it, etc., well, when it's tick box, it's not worth it, because you'll have a business or someone who will do something for a short period of time. That person will leave anyway, because they'll probably just think, well, okay, it's done, or they'll leave somewhere that probably takes it up a step. And then that business will just think, well, we did something there, it wasn't valued, and what a waste of time that was, and let's just leave it, sort of thing. Whereas they don't look at it as, well, okay, your intention from the outset, whilst maybe clean and pure to an extent, but it wasn't fully there. You half-heartedly did something without the conviction. And I always look at it and I always say, it's like, look, when you go in for a sales process and you got a process in mind and a map in mind, as a business owner, you're going to go fully for it because you can see the end goal, which is hopefully we're going to bring some business in. That same mindset should be for diversity as well. It shouldn't be just, oh, we'll just do it for a little bit here and there and whatever. If you do it for the long run and you have that passion and goal and the objectives and everything, that's when you're going to see the benefits.
Again, Omar, you make sense to me. I'll turn to Shivani for a moment. And last month, Shivani, there was a particular day, which was International Women's Day. And I think it was called that anyway. But whatever it was called, the organisation I was working with at the time said, let's have some social media about International Women's Day. Let's say we're celebrating it. And it just felt as if they were just waving a flag because of the day. There was no reasoning behind it. There was no particular event or series of events or campaign about the wider meaning of Women's Day. It was just, let's celebrate International Women's Day. Am I right? I'm talking to you as a woman, of course. Am I right, or should we wave a flag on the day?
I think World Days can act as an important catalyst to focus people's attention on a particular issue. But as we've just been discussing, it's really important that why you're doing that is clear, and that strategy to raise awareness, to remove barriers to women's equitable inclusion in the workplace or in society continues throughout the year. So it's a catalyst to focus attention, but it is not the job is done there. There's a much wider program of activity, as it were, that needs to come around that to make that day meaningful. Otherwise, there may be nothing to shout about or celebrate. Whereas this university, bringing it back to what I do know about at the moment, is, it was a really great week that week, because it was also the time we found out that we were the second in the country and the first in the region to gain the Athena Swan Gold Charter, which is a signal for universities in the UK that you are working towards removing barriers to promote gender equality in higher education, both for staff and students. So that was an actual really important day. And then after that, we were able to again shout about, I say I've joined the university recently, but I hope to continue the work, that 15 years in the making is what it has taken to get to a stage that says, we haven't cracked it. We've still got a lot more work to do. There is still a gender pay gap, etc., that we are working to narrow even further. However, through a sustained programme of constantly checking and challenging, we have got to this stage where the underpinning governance, process, accountability is there. And we have some firm actions that we can, through rigorous evaluation, say are having a difference to our staff and student community. No,
I'll get you, Shivani. That's interesting, especially when you say a sustained commitment, because it does mean that people have to carry on trying and carry on making sure they're doing all the right things. If EDI is so positive, why are there so many challenges in bringing that genuine diversity to the workplace? What are the challenges in higher education, for instance?
I think you have to look at the scale of the problem and the diversity of the problem itself. So if we look at some of the statistics in higher education, although women entering as students into higher education is really positive, degree completion rates are positive, workplace equity is just not there. So in terms of, as a graduate, as a woman, your lifetime, what you can expect to earn, your graduate outcomes, actually men experience better outcomes. If we look at the higher education workforce itself, there is equity in how many women and men work in higher education. However, when you start to look at who's in a professorship, which is a STEAM indicator, if you look at who is leading higher education universities, you'll start to see the disparity in gender. So, for example, I think approximately 80% plus of vice chancellors, so the most senior level amongst universities of a leadership position, are still identify as men. If we look at the number of professors who identify as minority ethnic, and if we slice this down into, minority ethnic women who are of a Black heritage, then you're getting into very small numbers of representation. Whereas if we look at the body of our student demographics, that's not reflected in the staff. So that is the scale of the problem. So to undo that over time will take that sustained effort. It's not going to be, we all care about EDI and we've solved the problem immediately. So I think we have to look at the history of higher education, to understand the scale of the challenge moving forward.
And from your perspective, Omar, thinking about the bosses of small and medium-sized businesses who you work with in your day job, what are the challenges for SMEs?
I think the biggest challenge is it's tackling a problem. It's tackling an issue. And if I give an example, sometimes we think about EDI and we think about race, religion, but actually it's so much more. It's gender, it's mental, it's disability, and the other characteristics. And if I give disability as an example, if you're a small SME and you haven't got the resources, etc., given the choice or the scenario of someone who has a mental health or ADHD or a certain condition, and they've got challenges or they've got adjustments or they're currently off sick, more often than not, the easier thing would be for an SME business to think is, okay, I could just do with someone who's not got those conditions, not got those issues, and just their 9 to 5, not causing me an issue to address or see the benefits of, okay, if I offer that support to that individual, I get loyalty, I actually get, commitment, etc. And I think that's the challenge, where that challenge comes from, whether it's a lack of education, whether it's a lack of patience, whether it's a lack of maybe evidence seeing that actually if I did support someone who needed that support and I get to see that loyalty, etc. Maybe those are the sort of routes, but I think that's something that through conversations I find,
Yes.
it's because it can be challenging. It can be, actually not challenging. It can be a bit of an unknown, for someone to sit down with someone with a condition to have those awkward conversations or difficult conversations to say, what are the issues? How can we support?
Especially some of the workplaces we're talking about, because SMEs in the West Midlands, for instance, you're sometimes talking about factory floors, aren't you? You're talking about warehouses.
Yeah.
You're talking about potentially quite male, quite traditional working class environments.
100%. Yeah. Some of those who may have gone into family businesses, who may not have gone to college, universities, had a certain level of education, who've maybe brought up in a certain environment thinking this is the norm. Some who might just think, or maybe through certain experiences think, especially with mental health or with a disability, that someone's just using it as a tool or playing it, etc., etc. They'll have those biases. Social media might play an impact because there'll be certain instances, stories, etc., sort of thing. So there's a lot of factors, and I think sometimes as an SME, you're very much on your own. As an SME business owner, very rarely will you have a HR department or a diversity lead or someone to really call upon, unless you actively go out there and go for those services to then get that advice.
Listening to both of you, I love to hear the commitment you've both got, and also the detail that you bring into EDI. It's not just a tick box, it means more. It's a culture, it's a whole way of life. But in recent weeks, we've all heard some politicians, one or two of them in government even, talking about how employing people and teams and budgets on EDI is, and I quote them, wasteful. Some have criticised it as being part of the woke culture, even calling for local councils to scrap EDI schemes. How does that kind of language make you feel, Omar?
It's disappointing because, look, without getting too political sort of thing, I think there's instances in the government that they haven't shown the best equality, diversity sort of thing, without naming people or giving certain examples. But on one hand, if I take a step back and I listen to what they're saying, I understand where they're coming from, because if it is seen as a scheme, and if it is seen as, okay, this is something that we've got to do and it's not done properly, then maybe it is a waste of time and a waste of money, because we shouldn't be using that sort of language of it's a scheme. For me, we should be changing the narrative, or people need to see that narrative as actually, it's the norm. We live in a world, and look, we're in Birmingham. It is so multicultural. Any shop you go to, any business you go to, everywhere you go, the norm is there is people from a different culture. People coming in, that's not a scheme. People coming in, setting up their businesses, that's not a scheme or a campaign. It's the norm. And I think we need to change the narrative of businesses. creating the norm. The norm is that we have a diverse workforce. The norm is we have a diverse supply chain. We have diverse customers, etc. We network with a diverse range of businesses, sort of thing. And I think we need to change that narrative. And until we do that, and if we keeping it as, yes, it's an EDI scheme, or it's a campaign, or certain things, and then if it doesn't work because it's done ad hocly, then it's always going to be seen as, yeah, it is a waste of money. And I understand where that logic then comes from. So for them to say that, I get it, but then I was hoping that they would change the narrative to say it's the norm. We've got to be treating it as it's the norm to have.
And that's what was missing for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Shivani, how do you feel? Because some in government have said, we'll scrap diversity schemes. Now, they were talking about councils, but they might say the same thing about Aston University having a dean, you, for inclusion. How does that make you feel about your EDI role?
Well, I think I've been in leadership positions enough now to understand that in times of austerity, where you need to deliver business operations in a more lean environment, you do look at all of the kinds of roles you've got. And one argument may be that everybody should be part of the equality, diversity, inclusion agenda, which I absolutely agree with. I think where the roles come into criticism is actually because not enough investment has gone into these roles. Because if we look at the history, it tells us that just relying on everybody to do the right thing doesn't work. That's why we've got gender pay gaps. That's why we've got ethnicity pay gap, or we have, various other inclusive issues depending on the sectors that we're working in. So that doesn't work. But I think having had so many people reach out to me from other sectors for equality advice, my main observation, and this is just my observation, has been that the level of skill is always underestimated, because to lead true culture change around this agenda requires a high level of organisational management, organisational change management. But the level of investment is almost at a point that you can't expect people, given the amount of money that, for example, you're paying them and offering in these roles, to have that skill set. Yes. So often I'll be having conversations that say you need to change the governance structure to put equality firmly within and embed it across all the committees. And the response on the other side will be, oh, that's way above my pay grade. I don't set the committee agendas. I don't get involved in terms of reference or alike. So how can you expect that person for your organisation to do much more than arrange International Women's Day, put on activities for Black History Month, Asian Heritage Month, etc. So I think the problem is really in what we're expecting of these roles should be at a higher level, looking at people's skill set, not assuming that because they identify often with a diversity attribute themselves, that they'll have all the answers and all the knowledge and skill required. So in my very first post, for example, where I was employed to lead equality at a different university, within that particular school area, my first comment to my dean then, who was my direct line manager, was, because I'm Asian and a woman, don't assume that I know everything about equality. I would like you to invest in some training and development for me. Okay. Here are the courses that I want to go on. And they absolutely supported that. And the impact over the 5 years I was in that position was evident in gender pay gap going down by half, ethnicity pay gap going down considerably. We then moved from having an Athena Swan Bronze Award at that university within that school to an Athena Swan Silver. So I think it's about the right level of position, it having the right clout and the right person in it to deliver on the objectives. And of course, part of their remit will be to make sure that equality, diversity, inclusive cultures become everybody's business. But I think you do need the catalyst, i.e. someone like myself in a position that has the responsibility to drive that agenda.
Staying with you for one more question, Shivani, tell us a few of the most important things that Aston University has done, has shown, has accomplished to gain its Athena Gold Award for the way it handles EDI?
Well, that's a difficult question for someone who's been here for 5 weeks, but I shall do my best to summarise what's been 15 years in the making. I think one of the big platforms is Inclusive Aston, which brings together a range of different staff networks, of which there are a significant proportion of employees, staff workforce that are part with one or more networks. So that has been really important way to get lived experience informing and driving the activity. And then recently, an example would be the introduction of a program that a colleague of mine is leading at the moment on reverse mentoring. So the idea that senior leaders within the university support those identifying with a diversity attribute, such as a minority ethnic heritage, women within that as well, to understand and learn bi-directionally. So those are just some smaller examples. And then, of course, we do have really good beacons of activity amongst our researchers as well that are working to make sure that society more generally is inclusive. So, for example, within the last few weeks, I have been involved in shortlisting for the Asian Women of Achievements Award nationally. And whilst I was at NatWest headquarters, I really felt that it's a small world for a big university brand, because I happened to be in the room with an Aston Business School alumni who was running a fashion business, but also with some senior leaders at NatWest who said, "Oh, you work at Aston. We were there a few weeks ago for the launch of the CREM report." So this was a report by the Centre for Research in Ethnic Minority Entrepreneurship, which was about supporting ethnic minority entrepreneurship, as it says, and a report that was launched that summarised evidence and came up with 10 key recommendations for businesses of all sizes. So that was a really great example as well.
Came from Aston itself.
Yeah, because they're not necessarily about gender in and of itself, but they support that inclusive environment. So it's not only our practices, but the research at the university is also driving the social change agenda.
And in a nutshell, Shivani, what else does Aston University need to do to keep that gold, to keep that campaign going, to make sure it doesn't become a tick box mentality?
I think continuing to reduce the gender pay gap, which is still evident at the university, but is narrowing continually, will be one of the main emphasis, for example, in my roles. And also seeing, I think we still have a tendency in universities and more generally in EDI for our data to allow us to look at individual attributes. But I'd like to see that actually once you start to realise that people's lives don't cluster into nice little neat boxes, I'd like to look much more at intersectional disadvantages as well. So as I said earlier, yes, we're doing better in women gaining professorships, but actually if we look at Black women rising to those academic ranks, then there are still significant barriers. So those are the kinds of things I'd like to look at.
And Omar, for our listeners out there, especially the bosses and senior managers of small and medium enterprise businesses, what are the top 3 reasons why they should take EDI seriously?
I think you got to look at the opportunities it can present. And I go back to what I said earlier, something like language skills, the skill sets of people from different backgrounds, different, even with disabilities, it's opportunities. And I think as business owners and senior managers, that's what you're looking for, aren't you? You're always on the lookout for opportunities to grow, to develop, to enhance. And I would say diversity is definitely one of those. It's an opportunity done properly, embedded properly. The opportunities are endless because, from going local, you could go regional, you could even go national, you can go international, because you've got skills, you've got language, you've got then connections and networks, etc. I'll give you one quick example. An SME business engaged with someone from an Asian background, wanted to tap into India. Guess what? He had the connections. His family member had a connection in India, and they were able to open up another branch in India, sort of thing. So,
wow.
Do you know what I mean? It can work, and it's all about your mindset. So that's one definite advantage. The other advantage is, like I said, it helps with recruitment, helps with retention. You're going to save a lot of costs on there as well. You're looking at it as it now, it's difficult to recruit. There's obviously a lot of coverage out there around the demand for recruitment and getting the right talent. Well, you wouldn't be in that issue if you could actually retain and keep your talent as well. So that's, and there's enough literature out there. There's a lot of literature out there, a lot of research out there that demonstrates that a diverse workforce and a diverse culture embedded in is always going to perform higher and better than a company or a business that isn't.
Omar Rashid, a director at the HR department, and Shivani Sharma, the new Deputy Dean of People, Culture and Inclusion for the College of Business and Social Sciences here at Aston University. Many thanks to you both for taking part in this episode of Aston Means Business.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And thanks to you, our audience, for watching Aston Means Business. And thanks to you, our audience, for watching and listening to Aston Means Business, an original podcast series for Aston University. Remember, if you enjoyed today's episode, you can find and listen to earlier episodes by simply Googling Aston Means Business. We'll be back soon with more interviews with some of the top business academics, industry leaders, and graduates here at Aston University. Aston Means Business. Thanks for listening.